Hi, I'm Rivka. Welcome to OneShul's Monday Night Torah Together study. It's lovely to see you, Lisa. If you're watching and you haven't signed into the chat room, please sign in and join in on the conversation. Luckily, since we had the technical issue last week, we had some sort of bandwidth issue, but we've fixed it now. We're still in the same Torah portion, basically, as last time. So it works to our advantage to be able to just continue on with it. Yeah, I found out my bandwidth was really low and couldn't figure out why, and reset everything in the house, and it seemed to fix it. Patrick and I tested it today. He's a good man. He is. Anyway, so lovely to see you again, Lisa. Thank you for coming. And everyone else who's watching and will be watching later. Again, Shemini, Leviticus 9:1 through 11:47. As usual, there's about 3 main ideas as you can break down this section into. First, there's going to be the finishing part of the dedication of the tabernacle and the ordination of the priests that we were reading in the last portion. Then we're going to talk about dietary laws. And then this is where we're going to see defilement from and purification kind of further expanded. Because you have to think about this is that Leviticus is... Oh, we're having camera problems here. Let me see if I can fix that. Leviticus is the explanation of what went on while everyone was wandering around the desert in Exodus. That should fix that. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. So, like I was saying, this is more of the explanation. We've had the breakdown of what basically should happen for the tabernacle, and then this is the breakdown of what's going on, and then this is further explanation of ideas that have been brought up before or that were overlooked before because they simply hadn't come up yet in life. Chapter 9, verse 1. On the 8th day, Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a calf of the herd from a purgation offering and a ram for a burnt offering without blemish, and bring them before the Eternal. And speak to the Israelites, saying, Take a he-goat for purgation of fearing, a calf and a lamb, yearlings without blemish for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for an offering of well-being to sacrifice before the Eternal, and meal offering with your oil mixed in, for today the Eternal will appear to you." So here we have God's giving Moses his instructions to set the scene for the big event, to basically consecrate the temple and ordain the priesthood. Verse 5, they brought to the front of the tent of meeting the things that Moses had commanded, and the community leadership came forward and stood before the Eternal. Moses said, "This is what the Eternal has commanded that you do, that the presence of the Eternal may appear to you." And Moses said to Aaron, "Come forward to the altar and sacrifice your purgation offering and your burnt offering, making explanation for yourself and for the people, and sacrifice the people's offerings and make explanation for them as the Eternal has commanded." Now, what is this? This section here really is sort of Moses saying, here's God's employment contract. If you still want to be involved, sign here and do your animal sacrifice. You have to think about in this time period, we're looking at marking great events by making some sort of covenant, and this isn't usually written from what our records tell us, but is erecting a monument, setting up a temple, making a sacrifice, so on and so forth. Circumcision. All these physical manifestations of metaphysical ideas. But this is interesting because you're kind of getting an employment contract. And before we go any further, because it's just going to tell us the story of what's going on, let's go look at what we're looking at commandment-wise. Commandment-wise, we're looking at, by most standards, 6 positive and 11 negative commandments. We're going to look at the first 4 first. A Kohen, that is a priest, must not enter the temple with long hair. A Kohen must not enter the temple with torn clothes. A Kohen must not leave the temple during service. And a Kohen must not enter the temple intoxicated. And we can see this, which we'll read these parts a little bit later, is more about the employment contract. And it's sort of an interesting way to think of what the priesthood was. And still kind of is today. It's and I'm kind of got this idea because I've been reading Patrick's writings recently, and he brought up this idea of having to watch the system because you are a part of the system, and inevitably the priest is under contract for you to fulfill the mitzvahs that are supposed to be required. So I find that a very interesting idea. If you haven't read his article, you should check it out on punktorah.org. A lot of people that I've shown it to have really loved it. So check it out. So the next paragraph, Aaron goes forward and slaughters. So he takes on the covenant, and puts up for the burnt offering the entrails and the legs, and turns them into the smoke on the altar with the burnt offering. Then in verse 15, he then brings forward the people's offering, even further cementing this idea that he's a contract worker. He signed, yes, I'll do this. Now he has to complete the task that's set for him and his sons as the Cohens. And that goes on, and it tells how the slaughter and turning into smoke. Then verse 22, it says, Aaron lifted his hands towards the people and blessed them. And he stepped down after offering the purgation offering, the burnt offering, and the offering of well-being. Moses and Aaron then went inside the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the presence of the Eternal appeared to all the people. Fire came forth from before the Eternal and consumed the burnt offering and the fat parts on the altar. And all the people saw and shouted and fell on their faces. Now, here we get to have a picture. Everyone's come forward. Now, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan, put fire on it, and laid incense on it. And they offered before the Eternal alien fire, which had not been enjoined upon them. What does this mean? Alien fire that has not been enjoined upon them. They haven't been called to a specific sacrifice of the day. It isn't mincha, it isn't one of the other well-being, purgation, whatever. It's fire not called upon. And fire came forth from the Eternal and consumed them. And thus they died at the instance of the Eternal. Then Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Eternal meant by saying, through those near to me I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people. And Aaron was silent. So, why would this event occur? Well, this is sort of the warning, and I'm going to bring up Patrick's writing again. It's stuck in my head. It was great. The idea in Judaism of that you have to experience things to learn about them. And you can't just learn everything from a book, although you can learn a lot. These two made the mistake of going against their employment contract and not fulfilling what they're supposed to do, which is, they said, through those that are near to me. So through the Cohens, the community can communicate, or the mitzvahs can be satisfied for the entire community through the Cohens. It's their job. Just as if it was somebody else's job to make all the wood, or cut all the wood, or make beer, or bake bread, or this week matzah. Have to fulfill that employment contract. And so this brings up why those first 4 mitzvahs were so important. Why wouldn't, you don't want to want someone showing up that isn't groomed well with long hair. You don't want someone showing up in torn clothes. You don't want someone leaving during the service. You don't want someone coming to work drunk. So these all make sense. And where do we find these? Well, we find these in Leviticus 10. And it says, Leviticus 10:6. And Moses said to Aaron and to his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, do not bare your heads, and do not rend your clothes, lest... I'm sorry about that. Let me start again. Verse 6. And Moses said to Aaron and to his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, do not bare your heads, and do not rend your clothes, lest you die and anger strike the whole community. But your kin, all the house of Israel, shall bewail the burning that the Eternal has wrought. And so do not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting, lest you die, for the Eternal's anointing oil is upon you. And they did as Moses had bidden. So, you see here that this is the reinforcement of the contract. It's, you're anointed, we're doing services, don't go outside, or you'll have the same punishment as the other two that brought forth fire and sacrifice without reason. So we go on, and Moses and Aaron and the sons, let's see, we get to verse 8. And the Eternal One spoke to Aaron, saying, drink no wine or other intoxicant, you or your sons, when you enter the tent of meeting, that you may not die. This is a law for all time throughout the ages. For you must distinguish between the sacred and the profane, and between the impure and the pure. And you must teach the Israelites all the laws which the Eternal has imparted to them through Moses. So don't show up to work drunk, because you're probably not going to perform well. And it goes on to say further what exactly the rules are. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Before, you only were allowed to have the food eaten by males of the priesthood. But in verse 10:14, but the breast of elevation offering and the thigh of gift offering you and your sons and daughters with you may eat in any pure place, for they have been assigned as a due to you and your children from the Israelite sacrifice of well-being. So this is the first instance where we get that there's becoming an equality, that it's the whole class system of the whole group is being fed, rather than just the males. It's your first glimpse of an equality, which I think is important to look for, because this is an underlying sign of how Judaism works so well as an egalitarian religion, because it makes considerations for the facts of life, but it doesn't necessarily prohibit most of the rules that would separate the two. Now, of course, you have more later in Leviticus about wearing clothes and so on and so forth, and that's not so much of an issue in today's world where everything's made unisex, one size fits all. But it's the first sign. We can see even here in this writing that they're looking for an equal society, even though there's differences between the sexes. And also it's a self-correction. It's like looking at a addendum, looking at an amendment. Say, like the suffragette amendment. It's a great example of how the evolution occurs even within the canonized writing, and must continue to occur in order for the ideas to be transmitted and understood by today's group. Especially, probably those of you who are like me, who are kind of on the fringes of society, who are interesting people, who are not necessarily status quo. It's important to see that there's even self-correction in the first texts, and not even going into Talmud and that sort of law. We go on further to talk more about offerings, and we get Moses' approval, and everything has been decided to be kosher. So, chapter 11. The Eternal One spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, "Speak to the Israelite people thus. These are the creatures that you may eat from among all the land animals. Any animal that has true hooves with clefts through the hooves, and that chews the cud, such you may eat. The following, however, of those either chew the cud or have true hooves, you shall not eat. The camel, although it chews the cud, has no true hooves. It is impure for you." And it goes on. The hare, the swine, although it has true hooves, doesn't chew the cud. So it makes a distinction there. So this is where we get to our next section, which is keeping things kosher. And Leviticus here is telling us about, let's start with the fifth in our list. We are to examine the signs of animals to distinguish between kosher and non-kosher. We're not to eat non-kosher animals. We're to next examine the signs of fish to distinguish between kosher and non-kosher. Not to eat non-kosher fish. Not to eat non-kosher fowl. To examine the signs of locusts to distinguish between kosher and non-kosher. To observe the laws of impunity caused by the 8 insects. To observe the laws of impurity concerning the liquid and solid foods. To observe the laws of impurity caused by a dead beast. Not to eat non-kosher creatures that crawl on land. Not to eat worms found in fruit on the ground. Not to eat creatures that live in water other than fish. And not to eat non-kosher maggots. Although I would rather not eat any maggots at all. Now, I could read this to you, but you've probably heard it before. It goes on to talk about the other animals, of those that swarm, of those that swim, that are and aren't kosher. What will make you pure and what won't. I had an interesting story for you. The ADD, it gets me. Maybe I'll think of it in a minute. So, that all ends. Oh, I remember what it was. See, I knew it would be there. Locusts. So why does it say that there are certain kind of locusts that are kosher and certain kind of locusts that aren't kosher? Certain kind of insects that are kosher and aren't kosher. Well, you have the obvious reason of you don't want contaminants like bugs or like bees' bodies in your honey if at best possible. The common sense idea. But the idea that I was taught in university while studying Jewish thought and culture, basically the philosophy of Judaism, was that this is a time where you're going to have poor people where there's famine, there's locusts coming in a regular cycle, and if you're really poor, they're really a good source of protein, so why wouldn't you use them? So of course this is supposedly so that even the poorest man can have something kosher to eat if he can't afford to buy any of the other things. This, I think, is a cute little story. I wonder what the truth to it is, but it's interesting. Verse 24 is important because this is where we see the delineation starting to occur between pure and impure with death. And the following shall make you impure. Whoever touches their carcasses shall be impure until evening, and whoever carries the carcasses of any of them shall wash those clothes and be impure until evening. Every animal that has true hooves, but without clefts through the hooves, or that does not chew the cud, they are impure for you. Whoever touches them shall be impure. And also all animals that walk on paws, among those that walk on fours, are impure for you. Whoever touches their carcasses shall be impure until evening. And anyone who carries their carcass shall wash their clothes, remain impure until evening. They are impure for you. So what do we get here? Impure until evening. Wash. And that's the main idea that comes back in a lot of the Jewish religion, is the purity. Cleanliness is next to godliness. So, staying away from things that make you impure. Foods, animals, carcasses. But secondly, how to take care of that. Wash, impure till evening, and then you get the idea of mikvahs and so on and so forth. And they go on to talk about washing things in water to purify them again. And then in verse 11:34, it says, "As to any food that may be eaten, it shall become impure if it came in contact with water. As to any liquid that may be drunk, it shall become impure if it was inside any vessel. Everything on which the carcass of any of them falls shall be impure. An oven or a stove shall be smashed. They are impure, and impure they shall remain for you. However, a spring or cistern in which water is collected shall be pure, but whoever touches such a carcass in it shall be impure. If such a carcass falls upon seed grain that is to be sown, it is pure. But if water is put on the seed, and any part of a carcass falls upon it, it shall be impure for you." So this is really hygiene and common sense. Wash. If it gets wet, it's more likely to be contaminated. Water in a spring or cistern, that's what's interesting there. So if you can collect the water and you can guarantee its cleanliness as opposed to a river or whatever that may have been contaminated by a carcass of an animal that fallen down a mile up the creek or whatever that you can't see. You shouldn't eat food dipped in the river, but it's okay if you dip it in your house water. So that's an interesting distinction there too. And this pretty much finishes out well with verse 46 and 47. "These are the instructions concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move in water, and all creatures that swarm on earth, for distinguishing between the impure and the pure, between the living things that may be eaten and the living things that may not be eaten." So, that is the section for this week. While I'm closing up, if anybody has any questions or comments they'd like to add, please do so. and we can talk about them since we have a little bit of time left. I hope you found what presentation I was able to bring up for you useful today. If you have any ideas or want to start a dialogue or want to find out how to help, you can always email me, rivka@punktorah.org. Or speaking of finding out how to help, it's even better to contact Patrick about that, although he's a little busy right now, but he's good to contact if you think you might want to get more involved in the community. And his email is patrick@punktorah.org. Now, it costs a little bit each month to run this streaming, so if you've enjoyed this, please think about making a tax-deductible contribution. And you can do that through PayPal or by sponsoring something on one of the punktorah OneShul family of sites. It's easy to click and find. And we really appreciate that because that keeps services like this going. Thank you so much for coming this week. I hope it was useful, and I look forward to seeing you next week where we'll have hopefully even more to discuss. Take care and be well.